Welcome to Sunday School. Each Saturday morning at this time, the International Sunday School lesson is presented as a help to the teacher and the Bible students. And now the Bible teacher, Reverend J.J. Bowman.
Good morning. It's Sunday school time again, and if you will let me, as I do so oftentimes, come into your home, we'll look at our very interesting Sunday school lesson for tomorrow. Now, this coming Sunday and the next Sunday, we'll be studying the book of Job. This is one of the most interesting books in all of our Old Testament. And the subject of the lesson for Sunday is, why do we serve God? Now, this is a personal question, and the book of Job tries to give to us that answer. The book of Job is an interesting book in many respects. About all that many people know about the book of Job is that famous quotation about the patience of Job. But we'll point out in a few moments that this is not the idea of the book at all. Job had little or no patience whatsoever. Now, the poem Job is named for the hero of the book, and that is a man named Job. This is one of the poetic books of the Bible. Now, every good Sunday school teacher ought to have in his possession not only the authorized or the King James translation of the Bible, but also some of the modern translations that gives the poem in poetic form. Because the book of Job is a collection of poems that have to do with the subject of hope and faith. Now, if you have such a book as I was talking about, you will notice that the first two chapters are written in prose. That is, very much like we might read a magazine or a newspaper. Then the center portion of it, the entire center portion and major part, is taken up with a great epic poem. And then again, it closes in prose. Now, the setting for this great poem is perhaps in the land of Eden, over on the other side of the Sea of Galilee or down east of the Dead Sea. And Job seems to be a nomad. Now, a nomad is an individual that travels from place to place, oftentimes setting up his home, living in tents. This man Job had a large family, and he had many flocks and herds. The poem itself was perhaps written somewhere between the 10th and the 6th centuries before Christ. The exact time it's unable to place. But this is a very old poem. It's one of the oldest epic poems that we have. It's been read by men for centuries. Martin Luther said it's the most sublime book in the Bible. Lord Tennyson said it's the greatest poem of all times. Carlyle said there's nothing equal to it in all of literature. So down through the years, men have praised the book of Job. But first of all, we must nail down in our minds what the book is not. And it's not a book on patience. Now, if you read the story, if you read the poem carefully, you'll see that Job was one of the most impatient people that you ever heard of. He curses the day that he was born. He wishes he had never been born. He wishes that he could die. Now, we get the idea of the patience of Job from the book of James in our New Testament. The 5th chapter and the 11th verse, James speaks of the patience of Job, which is incorrect translation. It should be the steadfastness of Job. And some of our newer and better translations so state it that way. So this is a book on the steadfastness of Job, not the patience of Job. And this book teaches not patience, but it teaches the character of a man's relationship to God. God speaks, man repents, God forgives. That's the theme of the book. Now let's look at the story for a few moments that we might get into our minds. It's a story, the beginning, as I said a moment ago, begins in prose. Now if you would sit down sometime between now and tomorrow and read the first part of the book of Job, leave the middle out, and then the last part, you would see that you have a complete story coming down to us in prose. Now the Revised Standard puts it in poetic form. Another thing that is not clearly brought out in our English translations is that in the writer who wrote the story originally in prose form uses the word Yahweh for God. The man or the men that wrote the poetry, on the other hand, use the word Elohim for God. It's named, the book is named after the hero, Job himself. Now we're told that here was a man that lived in the land of Uz. Now the land of Uz has been located as east of the Jordan River over in the Moab country. And concerning this man Job, he points out, first, that he was blameless, second, that he was upright, third, that he feared God, and fourth, that he did no evil. And so the story concerning Job's life, no doubt, was circulated orally for many, many years. And then the writer points out in the story of this man Job that he had 7 sons, and he had 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep. He owned 3,000 camels, so he must have been in the trade industry, because camels were used to carry merchandise from Mesopotamia down into Egypt. In other words, if he were living today, he owned a fleet of trucks, as we would say it. Not only that, but he had 500 oxen. In addition to that, he had 500 she-asses, which were used for milk, so he was perhaps in the dairy business. And the writer tells us also that he had many servants, and he was the greatest of all the known people in the East. And in addition to that, he had a good and a wholesome family. And they had regular gatherings. And the daughters were even invited when the sons gave parties or banquets in their home. So you see, we have here a rich man, a good man, a blameless man, an upright man, a man who did no evil, a man who had a wonderful family and had many great possessions. But then the scene changes, and we have here the picture of a heavenly council. Now let's remember, as you and I read the story, we know what's going on, but Job did not know these things. The scene changes then from earth to heaven. And remember, this is a story. We must not inject our present-day theology into the story, or else we miss the whole point. And the heavenly council was meeting, and God said to the heavenly council, I have a man named Job who fears me and who does no wrong. But in the heavenly council, there was one who was called the Satan. Now, the definite article is used with his name because Satan had not become the character that we think of him today, but the word means adversary. And into the council strolls this Satan. And God said to him, well, where'd you come from? Oh, he said, just wandering and roaming about on the earth. No purpose, rather troublemaker, always negative, and his life was certainly evasive. But the Satan, the adversary, had witnessed this man Job that was dear to the heart of God. And he said unto God, why, does Job do right? Is he good for nothing? He said, you've put a hedge around him. You've protected him and you have favored him. But you take away his possessions and he will curse you. And according to the writer of the story, then God gave the Satan the privilege of going down on earth and taking away all of his possessions. Now the testing time comes. There was a family party. While the family party was going on, a messenger comes running in and says, "Oh, master," he said, "your oxen and your asses and your servants, they've all been killed by Arab raiders." And when he had finished speaking, up comes another and said, "And all of your sheep have been destroyed by a fire." And immediately there comes another messenger and said, "The Chaldeans have captured all of your camels and have taken them away." And then another comes up and says, "Your sons and daughters have been killed by a cyclone." And here this good and righteous man, Job, rents his clothes. And then he made this expression that all of us have known: "Naked came I from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So when all of these calamities are heaped down upon this man Job, he philosophized a bit and said, "I brought nothing into this world. I'll take nothing out of this world. It's the Lord that gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord." Now here we see something of the steadfastness of Jacob's faith. You see, the first and the third blows are due to human evil, while the second and the fourth blows are due to natural phenomena, a cyclone and a fire, while the others have to do with marauders that took away possessions. But in all of this, Job does not blame God. You see, we can learn a little lesson right here. For too often in life, we are prone to blame God for misfortunes that come upon us. How oftentimes in my ministry, people in deep earnestness have said, "Well, why did God send this upon me?" Or "Why did God send that upon me?" Now then, throughout all of these experiences, Job remains steadfast in his faith with God. He does not sin, he does not blame God. Now we must understand at this point Oriental thinking, because according to the Orientals and the ancients, if a man was successful, it's because God favored him. If a man was not successful, if a man was ill, and if misfortune came upon him, they thought it was because of some sin in his life. But remember here, in speaking about Job, the writer said he was a blameless individual, upright, a man that feared God, and a man who did no evil. Now, in all of these experiences, Job could not understand why all this misfortune. I may have been wrong in a lot of things, but so much, and I have not sinned this much. And that is the whole thrust of the conversation between the three comforters, as we call them, and Job himself. Now, chapter 2, which is a part of our lesson for Sunday, we have the picture of another conference going on in heaven. Now, this must not be taken literally, because of course we know God would not converse with Satan like this, but this is a story that is going to bring out the idea of the steadfastness of the faith of Job. So God inquires about Job, and he has remained steadfast. And then it was the Satan, and remember we've got to put the definite article to it, the Satan asked permission to attack his health. He's taken away all of his earthly possessions, all of his gains, they're gone. But the Satan said, a man will do anything to save his life or to save his skin. And so we are told that Job was smitten with a disease. Now this, from all indications, might be leprosy, because now we find him outside of the city, outside of the village. He's living all alone, and he is covered with sores from head to foot. And so we find now this good, prosperous, righteous man, an outcast, sitting on the ash heap, all alone. Finally, the story writer tells us that his wife came to him, and she said to him, "Curse God and die." Now, it was a belief at that day and time, if one cursed God, that God would smite him dead. So to get him out of his suffering, his wife said, "Why don't you curse God and die?" We sometimes wonder, well, where had she been during all of these tragic events? But the object of the storyteller here, as he's writing about this man Job, is to add suffering upon suffering upon suffering to him. Suffering first, physical suffering with all of the sores, and now mental suffering and mental anguish. But Job does not sin. Job does not let go God. Job curses the day that he was born. Job cannot understand why these things have befallen him. But you see, the whole thrust of the story is the steadfastness of this man Job. Now then, after some time, we do not know how long a time, other characters are injected into the story. And three friends of his, who perhaps lived afar off, come to visit him. One was named Eliphaz, one was Bildad, another was Zophar, and there is injected into the story a very young man who was named Elihu. And they come to console and to comfort Job. And notice, they sit for 1 week out there where he is and do not utter one word. And here I think we learn something, that sometimes silence is more eloquent than words. How many times have you had the experience of going into a home where there was bereavement? You don't have to say anything, just your presence, just a warm hand clasp speaks volumes. And they sit for 1 week and say not a word. A short call in the spirit of love. Now then we come to the poetic part of the story. The story continues beginning with chapter 42, verses 7 through 17, if you do not have your Bible written in poetic form. So that if you read the prologue and the epilogue, you get the whole story. And the poem then, the poet comes along and gives the conversations that the three comforters had with Job. Job was most impatient. In chapter 3, verses 1 through 10, first of all, he said, "I wish that I had never been born." He said, "I wish that I had died when I was a baby. I wish that I could die now." We see the tremendous impatience of this man Job. You see, throughout the whole poem, this question comes up. Why? Oh, why? I have not sinned so greatly that these things should have befallen me. And now we see him in both physical and mental anguish, crying out for light and understanding. You see, as you and I read the story, we know about the council in heaven. We know what's happening. But Job, poor Job out here all alone, he knows nothing of this. He knows that he has lived right. and all of these tragic things have come upon him. He simply cannot understand it. But through it all, the keynote of steadfastness stands out. Job gave up all, but he did not give up God. And certainly, here is a lesson that all of us can learn today. I've always been interested in the conclusion of this story, because when Job repents, then God restores him to his good health, and God gives back to him all of his possessions. He has twice as much as he had before. Again, he has 7 sons and 7 daughters. But here's the interesting little thing. The writer of the story gives us the names of the 3 new daughters. One of them was named Dove. The second one was named Cinnamon. And the third was named Beautiful Eyes. And so the story ends with all of his possessions being restored, his family built up again, and even the names of the girls are given to us. Now let's pause just for a moment and look at this story and see what lessons and applications we can learn from it today. And first of all, this one, that our service to God must be based on our love for Him. The Satan said the reason that Job who loves you is because you've been good to him. But the story points out that is not so. The thrust of the book of Job is the steadfastness. No matter what happened, Job was steadfast. Secondly, suffering oftentimes becomes a trial of our faith. And many times other people can be inspired by the way we work ourselves through the trials and afflictions that come upon us in life. The third lesson we must learn is this, that we must not blame everything on God when something goes wrong. Many times we can look back down through the past and see where we made mistakes and we made errors, and we are reaping now the mistakes that we made on the pathway of life. Again, I think we learn this lesson, that our true self, our real self, is shown on how we act in a time of crisis. Nothing could move Job from his love of God. That was the keynote thought in his mind. Then again, we must remember that this man Job was steadfast because of his love for God. It was not his possessions. It was not his riches. But Job remained steadfast because of his loving for God. Things that he could not understand, he knew that God would understand. So this is a lesson on steadfastness. And the central truth in the lesson is that the events and circumstances of life reveal the true motives behind our service to God. A complete surrender of life to God is necessary if our service is to be acceptable. Now let us listen as Betty sings for us, "I Surrender All." Miss Pam Dodd is the pianist. Miss Dodd lives in Lynchburg and attends a Heritage High School, and she will be our pianist for the next 7 weeks. Mrs. Sandra Mitchell will then return and be a part on the program.
Sunday School has been a regularly scheduled public service presentation of TV 13 for over 20 years and may be seen each week at this same time.